Okay, let's get started. You
All
want to kick us?
right, sure. Kevin, want to kick us to the next slide? All right, welcome everyone to the July to Integrals July webinar. Thank you for making the time for us today. We're going to talk about soft skills today. Kevin, next slide. In modern software engineering, technical competency alone is not enough. Successful delivery of software solutions requires effective teamwork, collaboration. What soft skills are essential for software engineers to work effectively on a team? This webinar explores the crucial soft skills that software engineers need to excel in team environments. Through a panel discussion, our experts will share insights and experience, shedding light on the skills that foster collaboration, communication, and trust within software engineering teams. All right, want to take us to the next slide? All right, so yeah, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to have a panel discussion. So let's meet our panel members. My name is Nate Chandler Smith. I'm a senior software engineer at Integral. I've been using software to solve problems for 17 years. Fundamentally, I enjoy solving problems and have worked in a variety of technologies and domains throughout my career. I am passionate about so-called agile and XP methodologies. We also have Seth Barton joining us. Hi, Seth. Please tell us a little about yourself.
Sure. Hi. I'm a senior software engineer at Integral as well. I've been coding since 2014, and I would say my favorite part of coding is refactoring and cleaning up old messy code bases. I love that game. And I really appreciate writing high quality, robust software. That's one of my favorite things to do. How about Kevin?
Thanks, Seth. Hi, I'm Kevin Miner-Tagan, and I am a product manager here at Integral. And I have been involved in various aspects of software development since I think before Seth was born. I've been doing project management, product management for 24 years at this point. I was a developer for a little bit, but we won't pay any attention to that today because my main role here on the panel is to talk about the other side of things, working with engineers, which I've been doing for, like I said, 24 years or so. So my favorite part of the development process is the part where we actually get to see something we put together, which is always great to have something deliverable. All right, let's move on to the next slide.
All right, yeah, each of us has our own perspective, and we're going to share them in a little bit. But first, let's talk about soft skills. What are soft skills? As we venture into the realm of soft skills, it's important to understand what we mean by this term. It can be tricky to define, but play a crucial role in our professional lives. Unlike hard skills that are specific to individual professions, soft skills are applicable across various fields. They can be referred to as power skills, common skills, or core skills. Let's use the following definition for this discussion. Soft skills are personal attributes that enable someone to interact effectively. It is within this context that we aim to explore the soft skills essential for working effectively in a team with other individuals. Now let's delve into the specific skills we have discovered to be beneficial for effective teamwork and collaboration. All right, I'm going to go first. I'm going to talk about building trust. To me, having trusting relationships with people on my team is paramount. But what does trust mean in this context? When I say trust, I want people to feel comfortable simply knowing that I am involved in solving a problem, and I look for the same in my teammates. So then, how do we build and maintain trust? I was not always in software. I started out in physics and mathematics, and it has affected me. I tend to model things. I will share with you my model for building and maintaining trust on a team. In my view, Empathy, humility, courage, and resilience are all part of building trust. Empathy and humility help us understand ourselves and each other better. When combined with courage and resistance, we equip ourselves with the ability to act on this insight. Let's talk about these things in turn. All right, so I'm a bit of a storyteller. So let me tell you a story where I learned that when people do something that I think is crazy, it probably means there's some understanding that I lack. I was 7 months into a 10-month contract working as a software engineer and consultant as part of an embedded team within a client team. And then everything changed. Like I said, we've been working alongside and embedded inside of this client team. We're a very large team. We had 15 to 20 people working on a large web app. One day, and rather abruptly, we were told to stop working on our part of the system. We were going to work on another part of the system. Oh my goodness, shots fired, everything changed. What just happened? Let's take a moment to think about this. Put yourself in our shoes. How would you feel? How would you react? We were understandably upset. That was 7 minutes. That was 7 months of frustration working with the client wasted. Just like that. Somebody woke up one day and just nuked the whole thing. There was 7 months of coaching and agile, XP, testing. We had these marathon technical solutioning and refinement sessions so that everybody could understand what everybody else was about to do. All of this knowledge, all of this, it just seemed wasted. Just like that. Okay, well, let's take a moment to think about this from the client's perspective. How do you think they felt? How do you think they reacted? Why do you think they asked us to do this? I can't say for sure, but I'm pretty sure that they were frustrated too by the 7 months. They probably also felt that there was wasted time. They spent all that time coaching us on their system, their users' workflow, their business rules, how their things that they worked, that they had built over decades in their business. Furthermore, there was a bunch of time spent talking to a bunch of arrogant devs who were difficult to work with. To their point, only one dev, me, made it through all of those 10 months. After only 4 months in, only the product manager and myself remained in the engagement. Every other consultant from my org had been replaced. This probably was pretty vexing for the client. So you might be wondering, so why the client change after 7 months? Our good old friend, reduction in force. Our client could not afford everyone that they had working on the entire application, right? Zoom out a little bit. This was a large web application. They had many teams working on the thing, doing the thing, building the thing. As frustrated as we were, we eventually realized, thankfully, they also realized a corresponding reduction in scope. As part of the scope reduction, they wanted us to pull ahead something that would showcase the value they were bringing into the market. We were the best team that they had, and they wanted us working on this item because it was already behind out of the gate. This speaks to the amount of trust that we had built with the client through all these sessions and time spent with their devs understanding them and their system. All that stuff that we thought was wasted, all that time that we had thought wasted initially based on this information that we got was far from wasted. It was paramount to us going forward as a partner with our client. Here I learned that when people do something I think is crazy, it could very well be that there is understanding that I don't have that well explains what they are doing. By exercising humility, we can learn where our understanding lacks. Next slide. Let me tell you about a humbling experience that happened to me a few years ago. I was once on a team building a public-facing API in the cloud around our clients' non-public cloud systems. At one point, I was in the hot seat having to explain technical decisions that had been made by some folks inside and outside of the team. To make matters more interesting, I had recently been given a battlefield promotion, as we would say in the Marines, to tech lead. More on how that came about later when we talk about courage. In this case, I found myself in a meeting having to explain decisions regarding data model design, then redesign, and possible pending redesign again. I was also fielding questions about the plan, or really lack thereof, to get to production, as well as some CI/CD challenges and some architectural decisions that puzzled our stakeholders. Again, many of these decisions had not been made by me or even the team. Many of them I was unaware of. All of them I was unprepared for, and all of them I was being held accountable for. How do you think it went? How would you react to this situation? To be fair, there were some things that we had been ignoring. On one hand, they were right. We weren't ready for production. On the other hand, no one knew when that date was because of very valid reasons that I won't get into here. On the other hand, looking back, I also now have an opinion. If you don't know when the production date is, you should probably find that out from somebody. See the section on empathy earlier. Nobody wants to be surprised by that. At the time, on the call, I did the best that I could to explain the decisions that had been made. I did my best to both explain the reasoning while not being defensible about it. There was a time when I said that I didn't know and I was going to have to follow up with an answer. That's what I did in the meeting. That's only part of the story. Let's talk about some things that happened after the meeting. I changed. The team changed. We did a few things differently from then on. We had been demoing every week. From that point, we doubled down on the demo. Part of our demo was going through what, at that point, we started going through some of the things that we had been tracking, but kind of sweeping under the rug during the demo because they were kind of uncomfortable to talk about them. Well, we started talking about them with the intention of working with the client and getting through that discomfort. We went through both the vulnerability report and the test coverage report with the client. We let them know the decisions that we were making and why we made them. We solicited feedback, and finally, we documented those decisions live each week on the demo. It was something that at the time I hadn't done a lot and was very, very discomforting at the time. Also learning in retrospect. Very, very critical for the success of that engagement. The client was more engaged in these demos, and in the end, we built more trust by performing these actions. So we didn't just take the feedback. I made sure that we acted on that feedback with empathy, putting ourselves in their shoes. We had the courage to act on this feedback, which leads us to courage. Let me tell you another story about courage and confidence. Earlier on in that story, I was just telling you, I was on a dysfunctional team. Our sprint velocity was in a death spiral. My teammates had a tendency to argue and bicker. They would say unkind things to each other. Division and blame were forming between the offshore and onshore devs on the team. Refinement was falling apart as there were as well as some other sprint ceremonies because people were arguing. I was asked to step up and fill the tech lead role while the previous tech lead would go on vacation. What do you think I was doing that I was asked to fill in? Would you have accepted the role? What would you have done in this role? To tell the truth, I reluctantly accepted the role. I was reluctant because I was quite scared. Previously, I had been demoted from a leadership role in another organization, so I had plenty of trepidation about how I would perform. Also, some of the technology that we were using was new to me. I was still uncomfortable. At the time, I was uncomfortable with it. For some reason, I didn't let that stop me from stepping up. The first thing I went after was the velocity death spiral. It probably helps that I don't take velocity too seriously. On the other hand, a clear downward trend is not good, even if a bit spiky. Low velocity is typically used as a cudgel to put pressure on the team. There is enough pressure on this team without the weekly finger pointing at the burn down chart, which was not burning down. I prioritized my attention on getting whatever was close to finishing across the finish line. Sometimes that was getting information from the client. Sometimes that was coaching the offshore devs. Sometimes that was soloing on a story, whatever it took to get points on the board. Why? Something, anything to get the team and the client to trust in the team again. Anything to get points on the board. People want to be part of a successful team. And in that scenario, with so much focus on the velocity, success looked like more velocity. And it worked. To be clear, much of the credit goes to the talented folks on the team for turning the ship around. On the other hand, I do feel that the uptick in velocity relaxed the pressure, which relaxed the devs team that got us out of the death spiral. This is what confidence, i.e. a courage boost, looks like. Not only happened for me, this isn't only about me and my courage and my confidence. The whole team got a confidence boost and had more courage throughout the rest of the engagement to do things in places that they normally would not do and have conversations. See previous example where it was certainly a humbling experience. Thankfully, that happened after this. And with the confidence that the team had, seemed to take that previous scenario in stride and really stepped up to the plate. For what it's worth, and maybe there's other people, I say this because maybe there's other people out there that really don't consider themselves courageous. I don't consider myself a particularly courageous person, but it appears that my threshold for tolerating uncomfortable situations might be rather high. Also, by focusing on my attention on building empathy and humility, I think it was easier for me to look like I'm acting with confidence or even courage. When all else fails, I simply keep trying something, anything. And that leads me to resilience. So another story. I was once on a team and we were struggling to align on testing and test methodology. Oh, the back and forth between me and the team, me and the client devs, and the client leadership, and the leadership in the organization that I was a part of. The client was a startup and they considered themselves the wildest of Wild West programmers. Me and my team, extreme programming, test-driven development. Those were our norms. It got real crazy when I learned that the client leadership used to be an advocate for developer tests. And when I talked with him to get him to come around to our way of working, he knew what I was going to say before I even said it. Similar early attempts to work with my leadership did not end well either as I tried to bridge the gap. Where did I go wrong? What would you do differently? How do you think I felt? Eventually, through several cycles and a whole bunch of persistence, I uncovered some norms that everyone could deal with. It was a tough slog to get there, though. As soon as I thought I had something that one group liked, someone else disapproved. I didn't want to alienate myself from the team, the client, or leadership. At one point, I felt like I was on my own island. There's also some Slack messages that I wish I could take back. I'll also say this. I never thought, until that incident and some things that some folks had shared with me, I never thought of myself as particularly being resilient. I fall down. See previous comment about Slack messages I wish I could take back. I fall down and I fail too often for me to have resilience. This is what I told myself. I learned the hard way that when it comes to resilience, humans, like the systems that we build, if you look at the SRE version of definition of resilience, right? Resilience has more to do with how often we get back up, not how often we fall down. Sure, we wish that we could never fall down. We wish that we could never have problems. I know that I do. But what fun is there in that? If there weren't problems, we probably would not have solutions, which would also mean no technology solutions, and probably also there would be no need for consultants. I think Emerson put it best. Finish each day and be done with it. You've done what you could. Some blunders and absurdities have no doubt crept in. Forget them as soon as you can. For tomorrow is a new day. You shall begin it serenely with too high a spirit to be covered with your old nonsense. Next slide. So yeah, that's it. In my experience, to build trust and succeed despite of challenges requires the courage to try something different, because something different is probably needed. It requires humility to accept that I need help, and also requires empathy to understand the needs and perspectives of the others involved. Of course, any of that could also be the problem. Therein lies the rub, and that is why I have to keep trying. A big part of doing all of this well is communication. Kevin is going to talk to us about effective communication.
Thank you, Nate. That was great. I'm trying to figure out a better segue than just diving right in. And I couldn't come up with one. So let's just get started talking about communication, or how I love to learn, or how I learned to love TLDR, favorite term. I want to present a real quick example on why communication is important. This is a hypothetical. Nobody needs to get super anxious, although, to be fair, my intent is for you to be a little anxious by the time you get finished reading this. For those of you just listening in, I'll read it for you. Imagine you got a text message or a voicemail that said this: "Hey boss, I'm calling you to let you know that we had to close early tonight. It was evening rush and we were slammed. Orders were being shouted and everyone was in a hurry. Tommy was cooking up a storm, and despite all the chaos, we were keeping on top of the orders. I went to grab an entree and accidentally knocked over a container of hot oil onto the griddle. The fire marshal would like you to come down to talk with her, and Tommy is headed to the hospital." Now, I don't know about you, but the first question that comes to mind is, what actually happened? Like, if I was that person in that situation and that was all the information I got, I'd be panicking right now. Like, there was obviously some kind of fire. The fire marshal was there. What happened to Tommy? Is everybody else okay? All I got out of that communication was, I need more information. I didn't get enough, and I now have to follow up a lot. A lot. So why does that kind of stuff happen? This is a common problem in communication. It is not, however, a new problem. We've been having communication problems, and I've been coaching on communication problems for my entire career, which doesn't actually happen to be around the dawn of the interoffice memo. But when people started writing things down for business reasons, this problem popped up. And not only that, but people having problems communicating and not being clear has only really gotten worse as technology has made communication cheaper. Back in the interoffice memo days, you probably proofread that a couple of times before you send it off. It cost more to have someone type that up and send that out to distribute it. With the advent of email, it got even easier to send out communications, and people got a little bit relaxed on, and I'm not talking grammar and formatting, I'm talking about structure and content, by the way. And I mean, the other example that I can come up with really easily is social media has broken that wall down even further. No matter what you think of our past president, who is by far probably the most official person in the government, was sending out tweets that didn't have a lot of content. So we are inundated all day long with examples of how not to communicate. And not only that, but we're immersed in information all day long. And this is where this is much more pertinent. I'm going to focus on, like I said, the content of what you're talking about. And engineering is a very detail-oriented, focused discipline. And there is an immense amount of information that can be conveyed one way or the other through people to people. And a lot of what the focus is when the upcoming slides is going to be about how we process information and how we communicate effectively when there are so many details.
Kevin, real quick,
Yes.
can you define an inter-office memo?
Yes. That's probably, that's showing my age. An inter-office memo back in the days before email or Slack or any kind of electronic communication would be something where, you know, the boss man has a secretary type up a memo that would go physically distributed to every single person in the company. It would normally be like, think of a corporate memo you would get from like HR, for instance, as a good example. It's like, it is no longer, you know, appropriate for you to microwave fish in the common office spaces. That would, in the past, would be typed up on a actual typewriter and distributed with people. So it's not anything that's pertinent to today's technology. That was more of a history of like why this isn't a new thing. That's a great question, though, and thank you for making me feel old. But the main reason we're all having trouble communicate, and this is a little bit of a hot take, but we were taught wrong from the very beginning. Primary school or elementary school or grade school or whatever you call it, we're taught about the 5-paragraph essay. You know, we have a short introduction whose only purpose is to get people interested in reading the rest of the information. It doesn't have a summary or conclusion. It just says, hey, what's going on? 3 body paragraphs to support your argument. And then finally, you have a conclusion that actually sums up and gives the information that you want. It conveys the request. It comes to the conclusion you want to present. Another good example of why we can't communicate very well is drama often has rising action at the very beginning. It draws people in. There's a lot of examples of communication that are out there that are basically, you have a hook that says keep reading. And that's not a great and effective way to communicate in business. The main reason is because there's a lot of people that don't have a lot of time. We're going to get to that here in a second. But, you know, what are we going to do to undo all of the bad examples that we've been given throughout our lives? And the best thing we can do is, actually, these have co-evolved in independent streams, as you can see. My first example of this is I went through the 5-paragraph essay, and then in my English 101 course in college, my professor sat us down, had us write an essay, and he failed every single one of us because we followed the format that we'd learned in high school. And he did it on purpose. He said, nope, you guys all flunked. You can't write. You need to write better. You need to think about your audience. You need to consider your audience. Don't follow a format. Follow a line of thought. Have a through line. Explain what you're going to do. Then show how you did it. And then if you have some extra information, throw it at the bottom. But the important thing goes first. That's the important takeaway for everybody. If you walk away learning nothing, that's it. And you can actually see, it's kind of funny. Nate had a trust rectangle and I have a communication triangle. And at the top of that triangle is to put the most important salient facts at the very beginning. What do you want somebody to do? What needs to be done? Or what information needs to be conveyed first. And then you have a list of key arguments, and then you have supplemental information or detailed information for the people that want to read it. That pyramid specifically was coined by Barbara Minto. I've got a couple links for those of you that want to follow up after the fact with examples or links to the book, a summary, and then a blog post that kind of goes into much more detail about all this stuff. I also want to highlight a skip down, but my favorite acronym, there's a military practice that I found out about called bottom line up front. It's abbreviated BLUF. So you can bluff your way to good communication. I thought that was a cool takeaway. And also just the internet in general. I mentioned TLDR beforehand. There are many blog posts. I'm sure you guys have seen something where you would read a 47-paragraph long synopsis of why the 4th Indiana Jones movie is horrible. And then at the very end, someone will post TLDR and then a simple sentence that says Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull sucked because it shouldn't have ever been made, right? That's exactly what we're talking about. Good writers will put the TLDR at the top of the 47-paragraph discourse on film, and bad ones will put it at the very, very, very end. The best way that I can part good practices for good communication. These are all great thought experiments, and people have written a lot of stuff about it. But when it comes to internalizing how to communicate correctly, these are kind of the things that I pulled out in terms of that. And most of them involve just doing a little bit of thinking before you start writing anything. The first thing you can do, even if you don't do it right at the beginning, at least do it while you're writing, before you click send or whatever. Organize your thoughts. Why are you writing this? Like, why are you writing this down? Is this an informational dump? Is this a request for, like, maybe you need more money for a budget or something like that? You're writing someone to qualify why those requirements are necessary. So what's the ask? I need you, Steph, to read this because this is information that is important for us to continue moving forward. Or Nate, I need you to give me more money for something because people are microwaving fish in the cafeteria. The other thing is to consider your audience. This is really important. Sometimes you don't always know everyone in your audience, but you should really look for your key personas, if you will. Who are they? What's their expertise level with the content I'm about ready to be talking about? This is really special in engineering. I run into this all the time. I am not super technically proficient anymore. I was 25 years ago, which is an age and a half. Obviously, I've got the inner office memo cred, but that's about it. So when I talk with an engineering person, a lot of times they're going to have to simplify. I hate to use the word dumb it down, but dumb it down for me. I'm not going to know all the acronyms. I'm not going to know all the frameworks you guys are talking about. So in some cases, what I'm asking you to do when you're communicating with them is find your lowest common denominator. Like, who's the least technically expertise in the audience that I'm presenting, and write it for them. The other folks can skim over the other stuff if you need to talk through why this is that or the other thing. The main thing, and I put this on the third point because I'm super hypocritical, is get to the point quickly. Just FYI, I'm much better at written communication than I am at rambling through verbal communication. It is something you should apply to both. I'm focusing on written communication right now. And then the other thing is give them everything that they're going to need to take action. So this isn't brevity for brevity's sake. Don't give them a short sentence and that's all you give them. If there are supporting arguments, if there are additional details that you want them to dive into, put those in there. Just put them in later. Put them, be respectful. And that really gets into, like, why are we doing this? You need to be considerate of your audience. This is actually a common theme in all three of our panels, is to be considerate, just be nice, maybe kind even. We'll talk about that in a minute, Seth. Everyone's busy. Everyone's got something going on. They don't have 25 minutes to read an incredibly long email about something. And what I found in my history is that no one's ever going to read an email all the way through the first time. They are going to skim. I do that. I look for keywords and other triggers that say, hey, Kevin needs to pay attention to this a little closer. Doesn't mean that I won't go back and reread it, but a lot of times you get one chance to communicate properly. And if you're not structuring things correctly, people might miss some things. Another thing that might happen is your audience might not understand the details. If you bury the lead, if you will, and not get up to the front about what's going on, especially on the engineering side of things, someone like me who was reading it might not understand that, point A and point B mean that disaster C is about ready to happen. You need to make those connections for them. And a lot of times that's the best way to do it, is to do it at the very beginning. It's like, hey, the server room is going to be on fire because the air conditioner isn't running, or something similar to that. The other thing is that makes this super important is you want to be able to use your influence effectively. When you're writing, we're writing for a reason. That goes back to the previous slide. You want to grab and keep your audience's attention. If you have a lot of information to convey, you need something to make sure that they're paying attention. They are busy. They're not reading everything. I'm not saying you need to be super dramatic and be like, hey, everything's gone to crap, but you do need to be upfront about what you're trying to do and then support it with that. The other thing is organizing your thoughts and kind of structuring things with the Minto pyramid. helps you present a clear and logical ask. You're writing an email because you want somebody to do something, either pay attention to a problem or get you something or assign you something. So there's a much better chance that if you organize your thoughts up a little bit better and clearly communicate, you're going to get what you want. So there's a way to tie it back to the selfish. The TLDR, because I'm not above using my own examples, is if you spend a little bit of time running now, you're going to save everyone time later. Another good example of this is actually my father, who likes to post things on Facebook that are really just prompts for somebody to ask them a follow-up question. This call and response and call and response. That can happen in business communication. I'm sure you've all seen that before. And you really want to try and avoid that. Give everybody what they need the first time so that they don't have to spend time asking you what you meant by this. It doesn't mean that they won't follow up with clarifying questions, but it shouldn't be fundamental questions about why you sent the email in the first place. So now let's take that previous example and let's refine it a little bit using the principles that I just talked about. There was a fire and the restaurant burned down. There we go. That's the most important thing. It's the very first thing. Everyone got out safe, but Tommy burned his hand. That's a good supporting detail. He's headed to the hospital. That's also cool to know. The fire marshal needs you to come here for paperwork. We can talk about what happened when you get here. It's short, it's to the point. I know what I need to do, and I know where I need to go. It might be not the best example, but I think it's a lot better than the one we had previously. All right, I think that is my time. I'm going to hand this off to Seth to talk about kindness and niceness.
Cool. Yeah, we're going to talk about kindness and niceness and how being nice is easy, but being kind is hard. And you should be kind is the assertion that I'm going to make. Yeah, and then after this little portion, just a few slides here, we're going to have time to answer our QA questions. There's some QA questions and some in the chat as well. And then we're also, I think we have questions prepared for each other on the panel as well. So let's talk about nice and kind. I pulled these definitions from the internet here. When you're nice, you're pleasant, agreeable, satisfactory. And when you're kind, you're friendly, generous, and considerate. So I want to take a second to just think about those words used to define these two other words, right? Pleasant, agreeable, satisfactory. That's how people see you. I mean, I feel like those words connotate like a feeling from the outside in, right? It's like, oh, that guy is pleasant. He's good to be around. Right? He's not abrasive. Kind, though, if you're friendly, you're generous. That's something that's inside of you. Same with being considerate. That's something that is like a trait that you have, right? I guess pleasant is also a trait, but I want to draw this distinction here where being nice is kind of outside focus and being kind is something that happens internally. We're going to get to that a little more. You can go to the next slide, Kevin. So I guess we're really into like Euclidean geometry here because I have circles and Kevin had a triangle and Nate had squares. So we really like that kind of thing. I've got this Venn diagram here for like kind, nice, and just to clarify this distinction, some examples of actions here that are kind, some of them that are nice, and there are some that are both. Preferably, you should be both of these things, right? I don't think anybody has a problem with that. But if you have to pick one, and there are some situations where you might, you should pick being kind. And what do I mean by that? Well, you can do both if you like compliment somebody on some admirable trait that they have, like being courageous. You can be kind and nice if you're opening the door for someone, maybe holding it open because it's obvious that they need help and you're feeling like being good and helping them that day, right? That's a kind thing to do. But in that situation, if you were holding the door open and you were doing that to make sure that you didn't look bad or to make sure that that person was going to like you later, right? Instead of just for empathy's sake, right? For an honest thing like that, then we might put that into just the nice camp. So hopefully that distinction that I'm trying to draw is clear. Kindness comes from within, and niceness is something that you're doing kind of like performatively. It's also nice, but it's not very kind to like avoid a hard conversation. Or maybe if you hear somebody say something that you know is untrue, that would be better off if you corrected it for the sake of like your company, maybe in a meeting. I've been in the situation where like you might have a meeting and you've got a manager or somebody who is uninformed about the current state of the system. You're the developer and they say something that the system can do, but it can't do that, right? It's a kind thing to correct them and make sure that doesn't end up hurting your team, right? But that's hard to do. And so that's why kindness is harder. And usually it's better to do the harder thing if it's going to work out better. So that's why you should be kind. So next slide. So yeah, kindness, it's you're focused on the experience of others and it comes from like within you. But niceness, you're focused on your own experience as relating to how others perceive you, right? Okay, let's go to the next slide. We have an example here, or like a thought experiment that we are going to work through. And then I have a proposed recipe for how to have this conversation that we will work through. So let's pretend you're a programmer on a team and you've got a coworker who is writing spaghetti code, and it's spaghetti code. I don't want to get into that conversation about like, well, at what point does it become spaghetti code? Let's just assume it is bad enough that like, when you see it, right? It's spaghetti code. And that code ends up costing your team time and effort, because every time something needs to change, and that happens all the time, you have to go edit their code and you spend hours and hours trying to read through it and figure out what it's doing, right? So that costs extra time for the company and maybe even some heartache for your teammates. And let's suppose this teammate now opens up a new PR with like 1,000 lines, like it's a big one. And as a PR reviewer, like, what do you do? Like, is there something that you can, like, is there anything you can do? And let's assume this person is your peer, right? They're not like your manager. Well, I have like a proposed technique. So let's go through that. Here's how I do this. And maybe I'm not very good at this, but this is my technique. And so we're going to talk about this in our QA portion. Let's say they open that PR. The first thing I want to do, once I notice what's going on, like, hey, this person wants to merge in 1,000+ lines of really hairy code into our code base. The first thing I want to do is understand where this person is coming from. So I might roll my chair over to their desk if we're in an office, or maybe meet them on Slack if we're remote. And I would first want to like understand where they were coming from. And so I would ask questions like, hey, I was looking at your PR, and these have to be honest questions. I was looking at your PR and I noticed that like there's a really good opportunity here to break this function out. I'm curious why you didn't do that, or if there was a reason you didn't do that, just so I can understand it more, and have conversations about those pieces of the code that you feel like need to be addressed. And for a 1,000-page PR, that might end up being kind of a long conversation. But there's a chance here that if you have that conversation, this person is either going to learn something, or you're going to learn something that will change your mind, or it will change theirs. And so you can work this out. I see somebody in the chat is saying, have agreed upon code rules. That is a great idea. Yeah, you definitely want to lay those out. There's still the chance, and actually you want to automate as much of this as you possibly can. There's actually quite a bit of code cleanliness stuff, like formatting, that can be automated away, so you just don't even have to worry about it. But then there's stuff that can't be automated, and so you'll still want to try this. So yeah, the first thing you need to do is understand them, right? Understand why they didn't do that. There might even be they might have had a lot of schedule pressure. They might have not even known that the language could do certain things, or maybe they didn't know that their tool they're using, like their editor or something, could make all this work easy for them, right? And so the next thing you want to do once you understand where that struggle is to advise them. And really, if you're a PR reviewer, I think the appropriate thing to do is to ask for changes on the PR, right? So they can't like merge it in, and then just say, hey, I think this could be cleaned up. Point out where you think it could be cleaned up, and hopefully they don't take offense to that. We can talk about what to do in that case in a bit. And then one thing I always like to make sure I do is that, first of all, you got to make it known that you appreciate them working to improve this aspect. And this doesn't just have to be like clean code. It could be whatever, like whatever you're trying to work on. Let them know that you appreciate the fact that they're being honest and open, and we all are trying to level up the whole team and work, right? And then, especially if you have more experience than that person, or if you know something that they don't, share resources with them, YouTube videos, books, links, things like that, because that way, if say you've got more years of experience, you can kind of condense all those years where you were collecting that information, collecting those resources, and give the whole thing to them in like a package, so that they can get better even faster than you did, right? Which is a really kind thing to do. So that's my recipe: understand, advise, and then thank. So we'll move on to let's move on to some of the questions now, the QA questions. I'm going to start from the beginning here. Okay, this one is for Nate. This what's from the QA. Nate, does having trust mean that others think you or your team can solve every problem?
I don't think so. No, because I wouldn't expect a team to be able to solve every problem. What I would expect is from a team that I trust, and I'll answer this from the viewpoint of somebody external to the team, right? If I had a team working for me on a very tough challenge, I would expect them to solve most of the problems. I would expect that they would have some kind of escalation procedure, that working with them was not noisy, that they could reach out to, I would expect that they could reach out to somebody in their own org and solve their own problems by and large. I would also expect that there would be some challenges that, based on my knowledge maybe of our own internal system, right? Right? Because I think somebody somewhere probably wrote some spaghetti or gangster code that folks are having to deal with. In those situations, I would expect that they would have some questions about that. And that's okay. The point is, I would expect them that if they can't solve whatever the problem is, to tell me, hey, I can't solve this problem. Because I've been there firsthand when I didn't tell somebody that I had an untractable problem. That does not end well, right? I would expect that the team I would expect the blockers would be few, and that those blockers would be raised if they can't be resolved.
Awesome. Okay, we have another question. What is one way to kindly correct someone? I kind of went over that. I have a recipe that I try to follow with that last slide, understanding first, and then advising, and then showing appreciation, sharing resources. Okay, I'm looking for any other questions. If you have other questions, please put them in the chat in the webinar or in the QA section. I'm not sure.
We've got one here, Seth.
Okay.
I've been kind of noodling with it. What is the current most efficient software development system? Agile, Scrum, Google Sprint, or something else? I could give I suppose if I could think of a few folks that could give some interesting webinars on the answer to this question. To me, I think here it goes back to trust. I think that somewhere somebody in the business wants IT to go do something to make money, and they're going to trust that IT is going to do something to make the business money, right? And whether that's Agile, Scrum, Google Sprint, whatever it is, those are going to be arguably, those are going to be situationally dependent. But the bottom line is, I think that IT needs to be working with the business to solve whatever the problem is at hand. And as long as we're responding to that, as long as we're embracing, not only embracing change, but I think if we're also embracing uncertainty and working with the business to solve problems, I really don't think the development system matters so much as it allows us to do that. I've got my opinions on which one that would be, but I'll save those for another time. I hope that answers your question.
Cool. Thank you for that, Nate. Okay. And okay, I see a follow-up question here, which is, how do you correct a superior politely? Yeah, okay, so that's the hard one. What I really like to do when I see a manager or somebody making what I see as a mistake is my first instinct, I try hard to make sure that my first instinct is to assume that there's something I don't know, right? Because the manager knows more than you. So I just assume that there's something that I'm not aware of that means that they need to do X, Y, Z, whatever thing you don't like. So I go into the conversation with that assumption. And then I also go into the conversation with one other thing, which is I try to take like a business reason or maybe a team reason that what I think they're doing is not going to be good for the business or for the team, right? And then I just make them aware of that in as polite of terms as I can. Like, hey, I don't know if I just noticed that you were what's something a manager could be doing. Oh, here we go. I noticed you were tracking our like you were comparing sprint points per team member, you know. And I just wanted to let you know, like, I think that some of the team members are noticing that, and it's getting kind of competitive in the team. I'm not sure that's going to be really like as good for our morale. You probably have like a reason you're doing that, though. I wanted to come and understand that reason, or if we don't need to be doing that, suggest that we stop, you know. And then I'll let the manager, like, let them have their say, you know, because they, like I said, they probably know more about the team's performance and what's going on than you do, right? And try to come to an understanding in that situation. But you've got to have a good reason for correcting them. It's you can't just, I wouldn't just correct a manager because I just don't like something. But you can share that with them, right? Say, hey, I don't like when you compare us with points. Like, that makes me uncomfortable. You know, you could say something like that and then allow them to address the concern, and oftentimes that kind of a conversation goes better.
There's kind of a spicy follow-up to that, Seth, in chat, where believe your example was that the manager made a mistake live speaking with a client. Say your boss says your app can make phone calls when it can only text to the client. Oof, that
Yeah, that's an example.
that
Yeah.
is yeah, that sounds tricky.
I've actually been in that situation before.
Tell
Um,
me more.
yeah, I've been in a really similar situation. I'm not going to say where or what feature, but I've been in meetings where we were discussing, not with a client, so that example is a little worse, but where we were discussing with like executives at the company what our application could do. And I had a manager say that it could do some things which I knew it could not do because I had been programming it. And so I let it slide in the meeting. I didn't say anything, but after the meeting, I went to my manager and I said, hey, you know, our app can't do X, Y, Z, right? And they let me know, and this is actually a good example. They let me know that actually there was another team working on X, Y, Z. And that, yes, it's true, our app couldn't do it, and we had been trying, but the other team's app could do X, Y, Z, right? Even though, and there were still like fuzzy details with like what their version of this feature could do versus what our feature was going to be able to do. But
People waving hands.
yeah, but that is why they said that, right? So it gets back to like there were things they knew that I didn't know. And if they had told me like, yeah, I know, I just wanted to, it was going to be done next week anyways, and so I wanted to make sure that management knew that. I guess I would have said, I guess I would have cautioned that, you know, like, I'm not sure that's a good idea. Like, can we call them back and let them know, hey, that feature is going to be done next week? Actually, not right now, or something like that. Okay. We have kind of a miscellaneous question. I was going to let a miscellaneous question slide, but maybe we could tie this into communication for Kevin. The question was, how do you think building software collaboratively will change as AI becomes a new tool in the building process?
Thanks for throwing the AI question at me, the one that
Oh,
has the
you
least
know,
experience with it. No. I think it's really interesting because I've messed with ChatGPT, and the one thing that I can just demonstrably say is that it is never something you take directly out of ChatGPT and paste into something else. But honestly, I have used that to help clarify some of my own statements. I've used that as a tool to, I've got a long email to write and I've tried to follow my principles as much as possible, or I've got a really cumbersome sentence that I want to have restructured a little bit, and I'll throw it into ChatGPT and it'll give me something. Sometimes I'll hate it, sometimes I won't. I will say that it is not good at any information it has not already seen before, obviously. So it's not a crutch you can use to just say, hey, write something and not look at it. I have never gotten anything out of ChatGPT that didn't need to be massaged because it either missed the point, got something factually incorrect, or was just cumbersome to read in the first place as a human. It sounds great as a machine, but and then how we use that to interrelate with each other, it's interesting. I know we've got developments in place to help manage some of our communication, potentially using ChatGPT to, it's something that Nate and some others have been working on at Integral to help internal communication, to kind of look for keywords, triggers, sanitize some stuff so that we're not sending things out that might be confidential, critical, or incorrect. So it's really interesting. I think it's a great tool. I don't think it will ever replace like a person communicating with another person. Like, and I'd really hate to see a situation where like I need to send something to Seth, so I'm going to send it to ChatGPT so that it can be sent to Seth. That seems like a horrible dystopian future where there's no interpersonal relations at all. So.
I agree. Okay. Well, that is time. Are there any last minute questions we want to answer, or we can call it good? Let's call it good. Okay. Thanks everybody for coming. And you can catch this webinar on YouTube afterwards. We're going to, it's being recorded and we're going to publish it on YouTube. So we'll make sure to send out links for that on all our social media platforms. And we're also going to post these slides. If you want the slides, you'll get in, actually this will all be in an email for the slides and the link to the YouTube video. So make sure you watch that if there's anything you want to review. And thanks for coming.